Welcome back, everyone. The story of Abraham in the Torah is, of course, not exhaustive. Many details are left out that curious minds want to know. Of course, in later Jewish tradition, creative minds often filled in some of those gaps. Take, for example, the call of Abraham, or Abram, if you prefer, since this is before his name was changed in Genesis 17. When Abraham is called, he is told to go from his father's house. His father was named Terah, and according to Joshua 24, was involved in polytheism. Naturally, these brief verses raise questions. What was life like for Abraham in his father's house? Did he participate in idol worship? How did Abraham transition from polytheism to monotheism? It's these types of questions that creative minds later tried to answer. In this video, I'd like to focus on the last question. How did Abraham, according to later tradition, leave the polytheism of his ancestors for monotheism? The Apocalypse of Abraham, written within the first couple of centuries AD, has the most developed answer to this question, though much of the main themes that we see in this story are definitely found elsewhere, as we'll see. It's an interesting story, so let me summarize some of it for you from the Apocalypse, where, as in other sources, Abraham's father is not only an idolater, he's an idol manufacturer. So here we go. It seems that Abraham lived a normal life, normal, that is, for the son of an idol maker. Entering the temple one day in an account that sounds suspiciously like what happened with the idol Dagon in 1 Samuel 5, Abraham saw that an idol had fallen. It was a big idol, so naturally he needed his father's help to set it back up. This event was one of several consecutive episodes that got Abraham thinking more critically about idolatry. Here's another one. Not long after, he was transporting some of his father's idols to sell. A couple of them fell and broke. Later, Abraham accidentally burned one of his father's wooden idols. His doubts solidified into this realization. His father was more of a god than the idols were. His father's idolatry was foolish. But Abraham was able to use his own intellect to reason his way out of idolatry. But his theological journey was not over. There are definitely forces in the universe that have much more power than an impotent idol. Perhaps they should be worshipped instead. Abraham said fire is more venerable than idols in formation, for even the unsubdued things are subdued in it, and it mocks that which perishes easily by means of its burning. But neither is it venerable, for it is subject to the waters. But rather the waters are more venerable than fire, because they overcome fire and sweeten the earth with fruits. But I will not call them God either, for the waters subside under the earth, and are subject to it. But I will not call it a goddess either, for it is dried by the sun, and subordinated to man for his work. More venerable among the gods, I say, is the sun, for with its rays it illuminates the whole universe and the various airs. Nor will I place among the gods the one who obscures his course by means of the moon and the clouds. Nor again shall I call the moon or the stars gods, because they too at times during the night dim their light. Listen, Terah my father, I shall seek before you the God who created all the gods supposed by us to exist. Abraham's ability to refute idolatry by using his discernment of how the natural world works is found in other Jewish texts as well, like Genesis Rabbah, a commentary on Genesis written from around 300 to 500 AD. Here he leads Nimrod through a reductio ad absurdum. Thereupon Terah seized him and delivered him to Nimrod. Let us worship fire, Nimrod said. Let us rather worship water, which quenches fire, Abraham said. Let us worship water, Nimrod said. Let us rather worship the clouds, which bear the water, Abraham said, and so forth. So you see, in this rabbinic commentary on Genesis, Abraham's discernment is key to refuting idolatry. There are other examples of the same idea. I'll briefly show you a few. Josephus asserted that Abraham's observation of the natural world, coupled with his reason, led him to the belief in one God. In the book of Jubilees, Abraham's observation of the natural world likewise was key to his belief in the one God. Philo, additionally, says Abraham extrapolated a single creator of the universe by observing its natural order. By now you've seen how popular this motif was. Abraham's discernment, based in large part on his observations of the natural order, played a crucial role in his rejection of idolatry. Lots of authors appeal to this story, including the author of chapter 6 of the Quran. Here, the Quran likewise records Abraham's journey to monotheism. You're already familiar with how this is going to progress. You've seen it before. When night descended on him, that is, Abraham, he saw a star. He said, "This is my Lord." But when it set, he said, "I do not love what vanishes." When he saw the moon rising, he said, "This is my Lord." But when it set, he said, "Surely if my Lord does not guide me, I shall indeed be one of the people who go astray." When he saw the sun rising, he said, "This is my Lord. This is greater," and so forth. The similarities with the Apocalypse of Abraham, Genesis, Rabbah, Jubilees, etc. are readily apparent. Abraham in the Quran and in Jewish tradition, therefore, uses his discernment of the natural order to refute idolatry and move to monotheism. If you need it, here's a brief reminder from the Apocalypse of Abraham. "Nor will I place among the gods the one who obscures his course by means of the moon and the clouds. But I will not call it a god, because when night comes it becomes murky with darkness. Nor again shall I call the moon or the stars gods, because they too at times during the night dim their light. Listen, Terah, my father, I shall seek before you the God who created all the gods supposed by us to exist." But note that the Quran does not present this as stories from Jewish tradition. No, in the Quran, it's historical fact. Remember when Abraham said to his father, for some reason called Azar, "Do you take idols as gods? Surely I see you and your people are clearly astray." In this way, we were showing Abraham the kingdom of the heavens and the earth. Before we wrap up, let's look at some attempts by Muslim commentators to distance the Quran from its sources. Commenting on these verses in Surah 6, the Study Quran reads, "As noted above, commentators differed over whether the demonstration of God's transcendence relative to temporal phenomena in these three verses represents Abraham's own gradual realization of pure monotheism through a process of intellectual deduction, or is simply Abraham's rhetorical argument against his people's idolatry. So which one of these is it? Is it Abraham's gradual realization through the process of intellectual deduction, or is it a rhetorical argument? We've seen this time and time again. The answer is clearly Abraham's intellectual deduction. But the authors apparently want to distance themselves from that, so they opt for the latter, saying this was Abraham's rhetorical argument. They continue, "The latter interpretation seems to fit best the surrounding context, since Abraham's discourse in these verses is preceded by his explicit criticism of idolatry and his being shown the dominions of the heavens and the earth." According to this latter interpretation, Abraham's statement, "This is my Lord," upon seeing the star, and then upon seeing the moon and the sun, was not made in earnest, but rather sarcastically or in jest, perhaps with a tone of incredulity, as if to say, "Is this my Lord?" However, this interpretation is clearly contrived. The context in the Quran indicates that it is not all trying to be in chronological order. Further, verse 74 fits best as a brief summary that introduces the account that follows in verses 75 and on. With respect to a rhetorical argument, there is no hint that Abraham is saying these things in jest in the Quran. Abraham's thought progression in these verses follows precisely what we see in pre-Islamic Jewish tradition. On the contrary, then, the best interpretation of these verses is the interpretation that we see in Jewish tradition for hundreds of years before the Quran was written, Jewish tradition with which the Quran's hearers would have been familiar. Attempts like this to interpret the Quran apart from its sources is a poor substitute for reading the Quran in context. Frequently, that context turns out to be rabbinic tradition. As I've said before, the word of Allah so often turns out to be the word of the rabbis. Thanks so much for watching. I'll see you next time.